I'm not asking them what their thoughts about gender roles are.
Yeah, you are.
Okay. What are your thoughts about gender roles in your home?
What does that mean?
Okay. How do you become a mom? How do you take care of a family?
Me!
Go ahead.
I asked Mommy and Daddy if Aggie and I can watch a show, and they say, can you bet?
You take care of a family by
Making you the bets.
maybe. I don't know.
Now, I guarantee you, if you're a married couple, this one key that we're talking about today, you desire in your spouse, but you would never allow that to come out to say, I want you to have more of this. Now, let me just talk to the single people out there. This key characteristic that we're talking about today is desired in every single person in their future spouse, although they would never put this on a dating profile. The thing is, whenever you look at this outside the relationship of context, you also see this inside of work. Every manager, every boss, every owner of a business hopes to have this one key characteristic inside of every employee, although they would not put this on the position description itself. So what are we talking about? We're talking about something that is really hard for us as individuals to find out if it's there. And the moment that we do a little bit of examination to say, hey, do I have this characteristic? The moment that we grab a hold of it and we say, yes, I have it, is the very moment that it leaves. And what we're talking about is something that's sort of ambiguous, but you usually can see it in other people before you see it in yourself, on the good and also the bad. Proverbs 11 answers our mysterious question by saying this. When pride comes, here's the first part, then comes disgrace, but with the, somebody say it, but with the humble is wisdom. Whenever humility comes and God starts the process in us, every single time humility shows up, wisdom will follow suit. Humility is the thing that ushers in what we all desire, which is that wisdom. We want to live life more skillfully, but sometimes we can't get to the practical idea of what wisdom is going to look like until we set the pace and set the area of how humility is supposed to come and start the process deep inside of our soul. So come on, let's just start with a little bit of a description, a definition of what this particular humility looks like with a few different perspectives. One is from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, a great theologian and author, he says it like this: humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. It's literally just taking the quantity of time that you think about yourself and decreasing that, occupying more time in your head and your heart on people that are right in front of you. And I love it because this particular definition gives us, C.S. Lewis says, there's a reordering of one word that gets shifted in a new position, and you have yourself a completely different definition. That's exactly what happens with humility. We move a couple of things around, we reprioritize, we have a different perspective on life, and it reorders how we see everything else. And this is humility. It's not on the first part, he says it's not thinking less of yourself. It's not degrading your value. It's not considering that your self-worth is decreased. He says it's not that at all. It's just taking the amount of quality and quantity of times that you think of yourself and just decreasing that and putting the focus and your attention and your energy on the people that are right in front of you, that God has sovereignly placed inside of your city. Now, if that's C.S. Lewis's, Paul's description is a little bit different, but also a little more expanding. Paul says this in Philippians chapter 2. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. He says, listen, let's just start here. Don't do anything, whether it's your job or whether it's your relationship or whether it's your day-to-day or whether you play or whether you're a student, if you're a teacher, if you're at home, if you're in private, in public. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others, above yourselves. And he goes on to say, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interest of others. I mean, highly practical. I mean, clear as day, right? This is humility in its greatest context to say, hey, let's formulate some opportunities where you can see this work out and pan out in your everyday. It's clear of what God is asking us to do, but come on, let's just be honest. This is nearly impossible for us to actually walk out. It's easy to understand when Paul says it. It's really clear whenever C.S. Lewis describes this way of humility. But then going on a Monday and a Wednesday and a Friday and walking it out inside the context of relationships, literally looking at the people in front of you and gathering more interest, more honor, more respect on the person that's in front of you than is on yourself. This is the difficulty. But this is very, very similar to the life that God calls us to. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and you can just realize everything that you're saying is not really being heard by the other person? They're really only waiting for you to get a comma so that they can insert some words. Come on, somebody, anybody? You didn't even put a period on that statement yet. Like, this is a run-on, okay? Just give me some time. And then right when they see that comma, they just get in there. Because there's some people in our lives that don't really listen very well, but they speak really well. And this is the difficulty, because we talk about, as a society, actions speak louder than words, but sure is quiet when it comes to the main message of humility. Because we need to do what James says. Be quick to listen. Be active in our listening, and a little bit slower to speak. So here's 2 litmus tests for you. 2 litmus tests to find out, okay, am I really living out practically, moment to moment, day to day, a little piece of humility? Am I getting better at this so that wisdom can be made visible in my life? One is, are there more questions than statements? Do you have more questions? Do you inquire more with your spouse? Do you take notes with your boss? When you're in a meeting, is there more listening and inquiry, or is it more of you input, more your hands raised, more your statements? What is it even in your mind? It doesn't even have to be verbally. I mean, are you constantly criticizing and correcting everybody else? Or in your own mind, are you making space for what's being said to think, I could probably learn something from this? Oh, that's a good perspective. Never thought about that. Where are you in the litmus test of asking more questions and having more of a general consensus of curiosity in your soul rather than the drive of statements that so fills up our heads? The second one is just more listening than words. Sort of like that. Sometimes we get really unconscious about, really nervous and embarrassed about empty spaces, silence. Like, our world is so packed full of noise that we're intimidated by silence. But silence is the very area, if you look through Scripture, that God tends to show up the most. We quiet our soul, He comes in and restores it. Isn't that what it says in Psalm 23? He leads you besides rushing, raging waters? No. Still waters. Because sometimes when you're out in nature and you see still waters, when you visually look at something, it does something in the reflection of how your soul should be. Calm, peaceful, and still. And that's what God leads us to. Sometimes there's silence. Have you ever wondered, there's seasons in your life, have you ever wondered why God's not answering you? Come on, you got a prayer request. You've been pounding on the Word. You've been coming to church. You're way open. God, I need an answer. And you feel like this is what He's given you? Maybe silence is part of the restoration process of the soul. And this bestows more humility so that wisdom can find its place. So when we talk about this definition and description of what humility is, I also want to talk a little bit about what humility is not. Because I think inside the church, sometimes we have a negative connotation around this meekness idea, and we think it's a soft pushover. We think it's someone who just is passive and complacent, and you're like, just woe is me, very dramatic. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, even in your own mind. You're like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to be a servant. You're supposed to step all over me. I'm just like a doormat. Come on, anybody. Have you ever felt that way? Just had that mentality? Or even thought that the definition of humility or meekness was that? But we have a wrong context when we think about it like that way, because Jesus never once thinks about humility as in you have to depreciate your self-worth so that you can just be a walkover. You have no limits in your life, no boundaries. God doesn't want that. Listen, Jesus was the most humble person you will ever see and read about. At the same time, he was never walked over once. He always taught people how to treat him and how to treat others. That's the portrait and the image, the visual that God gives us by way of example. Now, if you're taking notes, I want you to write this idea down. Humility is knowing the greatness that's inside of you, but it's treating others greater than yourself. Humility is knowing the greatness of who you are. Quick side note. You recognize the greatness of who you are, but you got to stop telling other people. Isn't that the key? I am so amazing. Oops, I guess not now. I am so humble, right? That's why I said at the very beginning. The moment that you think that you have obtained humility is the very moment that you lost it. It's crazy how that thing works, but it's almost one of those self-assessments that other people see in you before you do. But can I just tell you, that's the good news. But the bad news is pride works the same way. You're thinking, oh, what a great week. I feel like I've totally gotten rid of pride. And you're like, wait, there it is. The moment that you think you have pride is the moment that you have lost it. The moment that you have humility is the moment that you lost it. And the paradox is the same when you do it. Both are this idea that we can ask God to build something great inside of us. So what comes out is a display of wisdom. Wisdom, just living life well. So it is recognizing that the greatness of who you are. Do you know who you are? Do you know your true identity? Do you recognize that you have the image of God inside of you? Do you recognize that the fact that God calls you a son and he's your father, the fact that God calls you a daughter and he's the father is a fantastic gift? Listen, if that's your father and you are a part of that family, you are called to greatness. That's who you are. But it's rummaging that down deep in your soul. It's realizing, God, I need to know the significance of who I am because I'm not a pushover and you've called me to greatness. But the moment that you put somebody in front of me, I'm recognizing and treating other people as greater than myself. What that does is it increases my value of who I am, but then the moment that people get in front of me, what does that do? It pushes my value and my respect and their honor and my love for them even higher. Isn't that what God calls us to? Even to take your enemies and to love them? Come on, somebody. This humility says it begins with us. It begins with the right portrait, a healthy portrait of who we are, so that the people that get in front of us, we can serve diligently. That is how Jesus calls greatness. In fact, that's the very discussion that the disciples, right? These 12 students of Jesus were having. They were going from one place to the other, and all of a sudden, you can imagine a bunch of guys filled with testosterone, very competitive, all of a sudden get around each other and say, hey, did you see what I did last week? It was absolutely amazing. What you did last week, did you see what I did yesterday? And the greatness just kind of piles on, and all of a sudden 12 dudes just start talking about greatness. Ever been in a gym? This is what happens. Come on, somebody. I can bench more than you. Let's just find out, Happens to me a lot just because I love the gym. And so when we get in this context, I love the way Jesus just forecasts this. He never once squashed all of the disciples' ambition on greatness. He didn't say, you guys are so off. You're not supposed to desire greatness at all. What Jesus did, he says, if you really want to know what greatness is, let me just define it for you. If you have ambition and drive to go after something, let me tell you what that something to go after looks like. So in Matthew 23, this is what he says. He says, the greatest among you shall be your servant. You want to know who the greatest is? It's the one who knows who they are, can rest in the fact that I am a son or a daughter because God says so. And because I'm established in that confidence and I get reminded inside the Word of who God says I am, I don't have to put myself in the front view. I don't have to put myself in the conversation. I can place myself aside because I'm confident, I'm ready, I'm healthy, and I put the other person in front of me and move them up by serving them. It all starts with the mentality of how you view yourself and how you view others. God, I want to honor the people that are right in front of me. And I want your insight as to who these people are so that I can lift them up, build them up, and take care of them better than they thought that they could be taken care of. Because the flip version of this is a sick and degraded soul, one that's wounded, doesn't really have any room to take care of anybody else. Let me just parallel that to the physical body. When's the last time that you were physically sick? What happened? You were laid out in bed. Like, what good were you? Let's just ask. Isn't that how we feel? Like, I'm just worthless right now. I just want to get better because I can barely even breathe. You know, you're stuffed up in your nose, you're laying down, all you can do is sleep, and you're sick. Listen, when your soul is sick, it acts the same way. We get very, very, very selfish. Because when we're sick, we can only think about ourselves. But the moment when we get healthy, where's the focus go? Off of us and onto others. That's what God calls us to. The greatness of realizing who we are to increase, only so that we can serve other people at a greater capacity. Now, when we see this thing roll out, let me just kind of shift gears because we were talking about defining and describing. Let me tell you what. There's two proverbs that we really kind of talk about. Some things that you see almost every other day, maybe in the workplace, maybe just out in society. Let me just talk about them just for a second. Have you ever seen a couple? And when you look at them, they don't match up. Like they don't, you know what I'm saying? Like you look at them and you think, how did they get together? Like, have you ever done that? You look at a couple and you're like, this is probably what happens in my mind. I don't know about you. How did she actually say yes to that dude? You know what I'm saying? Like, and then I don't know if it's just me, but immediately my thought goes, he must be really rich. You know, I think there's a Kanye West song about that, but I'm not really sure. But I feel like you see these couples and you look at them and you're thinking, oh my gosh, there's just something off. There's not really matching up. And I'm not talking about the shirts that match up, wearing the same clothes. I'm just talking about two very different people that are together. And you're just wondering, I would love to hear how you guys met because I thought it would be impossible. But here it is, you know, it's possible. God doesn't, no, I'm just kidding. So that's one example, and I'm gonna tell you where I'm going here in a second with two scriptures and Proverbs, but let me just give you another example just to make sure that we're on the same page. Have you ever been inside of a work environment and there has been one person overly talented, overly gifted, and they know it? Right? Come on, they're just really good at what they do, and it really frustrates you because they tell everybody. You know, if I was on that project, that wouldn't happen. You're like, you know what also wouldn't? No, I shouldn't say that. You know what I mean? Like you get something inside of you that recognizes, yes, you're really good at what you do, but you're also really good at being arrogant. Come on, have you ever been this? And it almost like when these people come in, you wonder, there's just no space for anybody else because their head is so big. You're so talented and you're so gifted, you don't make room for anybody else in the meeting. And sometimes we see these giftings and we see these talents, and it's sometimes just wondering, I don't know about you, but you just have this question, how do you still have a job here? Like, how is your boss not just taking you aside and saying, it's been real, it's been good, but you need to go elsewhere? Yeah, I just wonder where the rub is until this person actually just loses their job. So here's two Proverbs, because you're wondering how are we going to link these things together. Two Proverbs that describe this very scene in our everyday life. One comes from Proverbs 18. This is what it says. A man's gifts make room for him. They give open opportunities to individuals with gifts and talents that other people would not have. And it brings them before the great. Proverbs 22, very similar, says it in a different fashion. Do you see a man skillful in his work? He will stand before kings, and he will not stand before ordinary or obscure men. Do you see a man skilled or gifting In his Proverbs 18, it will open a door for him, or Proverbs 22, it'll put him before greatness. Have you seen this? Absolutely. It happens every day. But let me just, on a serious note, let me just talk about this for just a second, because talent and gifting is step one to what God wants to bring us through a journey into humility. So come on, just stay with me. Gifting and talent may have gotten you the job, but if you plan on keeping the job, you better turn the talent and gift into some humility, or you're going to lose the job. Come on, somebody, you with me? Like, this happens in our everyday life. We display these great skills and ambitions in our life at work and in our relationship. But if we continue to put our best foot forward on our talent and expect to get anywhere, it takes a walking. It takes talent plus humility, gifting plus meekness, talent plus some character. Our calling is great, but our character has to go deeper. Come on, somebody. And we may have gotten the interview with the boss because of our gift and our talent, but if we continue to show up late and to do a halfway decent job, not participate in team building, what's going to happen is that very same opening that we caught in because of our gifting is going to be the same exit button because we didn't allow the gift to turn into some humility. Can I get a good amen? This needs to happen in our life consistently. Because remember, pride and humility are very similar. We can't see if we have possession of them. And the moment that we think that we have humility is the moment that we lose it. And the moment that we think that we don't have pride is the moment that we do. It's deceptive. And God's asking us just to take a humble look so that we can obtain what he has gifted us to have. So I'm giving you this one sentence. If you're taking notes, write this down. Humility preserves what talent could only expose. Humility preserves. Do you want this relationship to last? Then it's not just going to be about your best foot forward. It's not going to be about perfection. It's not going to be about just making yourself look good. It's going to be about transparency and authenticity and openness and honesty. That takes humility. You can, come on somebody, if you're single and you want to impress somebody, you put all of your good stuff on the first date and you think, I'm amazing. Why wouldn't you want a second date with me, right? But if you plan on being married, this is where the good stuff is. If you plan on being married, you drop that back and say, there's still good stuff in me, but I'm going to let you discover it. And I'm going to show you where I don't fall short and where I need you. Humility preserves what talent could only expose. This is the very idea that God wants to use every situation in our life to bring humility so that we can display God's great wisdom in us. Now, that brings us to a question, how do we obtain it? How do we get humility? If it's so obscure and sometimes ambiguous, how do we actually find it and obtain it? Then not just observe it, but how do we tuck it down in our soul? How do we keep it? How do we preserve this thing on an everyday level? I'm going to give you two answers. One you may be familiar with, and the other maybe not. Neither one are easy. The one is found in the entire Bible. It's not a popular answer. It's definitely not glamorous, but the idea is suffering, difficulty. We actually obtain humility by going through and welcoming difficulties. I'm not talking about big catastrophic events. I'm talking about the small ones that tend to define us. It's the small ones that get built up in our lives that we either react to and respond to in a negative fashion, and we let them build up throughout our day, and then we explode on somebody. Come on, anybody? I'm going to say that again because you might not have been tracking with me. It's not the big catastrophic events. It's the small ones that get built up over your day. That's not a big deal. That's not a big deal. That's not a big deal. That's a big deal. That's a big. And all of a sudden you take those small, not a big deals, and then one person says something, it's probably your spouse, and then you blow up at them, and your spouse looks at you like, where did that come from? And you look at yourself and you go, where did that come from? You know what I'm saying? Come on, anybody else with me? No, just me. But that's sometimes that happens to my wife, and I console her. No, I'm kidding. Kidding. She never does that. But maybe one day. This is where we welcome difficulty, and it builds humility, or we stiff-arm difficulty, and we justify it, and we just are left in our pride. Can I tell you something? In suffering and in difficulty, Every part of difficulty has a target in your life. Every ounce of suffering has a target for your life. And I want to help you out by just acknowledging it's not you, it's not the character, it's not your identity, it's your pride. Suffering has God's grace allows it to happen. Just read the book of Proverbs. God's grace allows difficulty to happen, but the target of suffering is always your pride, so that God will allow you to let go of something that you shouldn't have been holding on to the first place. And when this thing happens, we are built up into more humility so that God can display his greatness in our lives and our capacity can increase to serve other people. That is what wisdom looks like. So here's what Proverbs 27 says about the suffering and the difficulty that we go through. It's for a purpose. He says Proverbs chapter 18, a healthy spirit conquers adversity, but what can you do when the spirit is crushed? A man's spirit will endure sickness, those small little nuances, those small little moments where you're just sick, you're not healthy, you're wounded, you're hurt, inside of your soul, inside of your life, inside of your body, it doesn't matter. Those small things will trickle up to build you up. Your spirit is healthy when those things don't crush you. But the moment that your spirit is crushed, then you feel like your world is falling apart. Come on, anybody with me? Your entire world is falling apart. Why? Because your soul and your spirit on the inside is crushed because of the difficulty. We just allow the difficulty and the suffering to target something that wasn't supposed to destroy us. It was supposed to build us up. And that's what God says. I want you to enter into my kingdom through persecution. Acts chapter 4. This is the very conduit that we walk through so that God can build something great within us. Now, I told you I'd give you two answers for how we're supposed to obtain this humility. One is the difficulty here in Proverbs 18. The second one may not necessarily be as familiar. Proverbs 27 says, the crucible is for silver, and the furnace is for gold, and a man is tested by what? Listen to the illustration. Let it paint a picture in your mind. The silver is in the crucible, and I don't know if you've ever seen silver before it gets pured and fine, but there's a whole lot of impurities that it goes through. It's crushing, it's beaten, it's heated, and then all of a sudden on the other side of it, you can see the beautiful, shiny silver that you and I both have grown to love. Same thing with gold. Gold goes through what he calls the furnace, the heat, getting away all the things that don't belong so that you can just get to the pure matter of gold that is absolutely worth, valued, loved, adored, sought after. That's what God wants to do inside of us. And so then we come to the question, if silver goes to the crucible and gold goes to the furnace, what does a man go through to be tested to find something great? The answer is his praise. His praise. Crazy, right? I mean, you're thinking like tested by the fire, tested by difficulty. Whenever I was researching this Proverbs 27, I really got amazed because there was a quote that really just kind of attracted me and it really made sense. And I can't remember the guy's name, but this is what he said. He says, you need to avoid flattery. You need to avoid being built up just like you would avoid those who criticize. So humility takes the action of this. If you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. Humility learns both from praise and criticism, but befriends neither one of them. You can take the praises of man and you can say, there's something in this that I need to learn from. There's something in this I can use to build me up. But you can also take something out of criticism and say, there's something inside of criticism that's going to build me up. But the moment that you make roommates and make best friends with both praise or criticism is the moment that you're going to die by the one that you love. The moment that you are built up by the people's praise is the moment that you're going to die by man's praise. Come on, you've ever been there? You've had a great day and you just try to figure out why. Well, you got a lot of encouragement that day. And the next day when you don't get encouragement, what happens? You're down. Same thing with criticism. I think I'm doing the right thing when I get a lot of bad feedback. That's okay, then that's great. But the moment that you do that, you're encouraged, but then the moment that it doesn't happen the way you expect, you're in the valley again. Thus, God says, I'm going to make the crooked paths straight. I'm going to make the high and low places flat. That's a description of our lives, not to be moved back and forth by the praise or the criticism, but learning from both, but befriending neither, so that we can have a consistent anchor for our soul to find out the words of God. How do you see me? What do you want to say to me? His words over you as a son and a daughter are consistent just as He is. He is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. And how He feels about you with His unconditional love is going to be the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. But if you want to go off the praise and the criticisms of man, you will also be back and forth, up and down, exhausted by trying to figure out your own significance. But if you find out and listen to what God has to say about you, your identity is established and your destiny starts to become really clear. God, I'm called to do something great. And it's to take the people that are right in front of me and consider how great they are, build them up in humility so I can serve them. And I know the greater capacity that you want to increase in me, I can then increase the capacity of the people that are right in front of me. And that's why I want to leave you with this Proverbs 14, and I want to use it as a prayer in hopes that this is a guide and a marker for our lives. It says that those who live lives of careless wrongdoing are like tumble-down shacks, but the lives of holy living builds, soaring cathedrals. Come on, get the imagery of that. Broken down shacks. Have you ever gotten the figure, just maybe you're a homeowner, you've gotten the image and the illustration of there's always something wrong with my home. At some point in time, if you realize that you invest in a shack, what you need to do is just plow the whole thing, start from the foundation and build something new. That's what God has plans for you and I. Instead of taking care of the little tiny projects here and there, God wants to build something great. And this is God's doing. This is His initiative. This is what God does. We don't build our lives. He does. But we have to look persecution. We have to look suffering. We have to look things right in the eye and say, this is going to be difficult. And at the same time, we have to look at praise right in the eye and say, I'm not going to befriend this, but I'm going to learn from it. And in humility, somewhere right in between, we say, God, I want your fullness, because here's my prayer. I want you to build a great soaring cathedral inside of me so that I can make room for the people that are right in front of me. I want to make room to serve. I want you to make room inside of my heart so that I can increase in the capacity to love, because I know that if there's more significance and more greatness inside of me, then I can elevate those other people that are right in front of me, because what they need is the best and healthiest version of who I am. And God, that is your work.